Hi, I'm Peter Rork. I'm the president and pilot of Is My CoPilot. Did you know that there are 8 million animals in shelters around the country? These shelters are completely overrun with overpopulation, owner surrenders, and strays. They have 3 options to take care of these animals. Either adopt them out, transport them to other facilities that will accept them, or sadly euthanasia. And that means 1 animal in this country is killed every 3 seconds. And these are otherwise healthy and adoptable animals. Ground transport just doesn't make sense when you fill a van with 30 or 40 animals and you drive them 16 or 18 hours. That's just tough on everybody. And that's the service that Is My CoPilot provides. We provide the long distance transport where ground transport just doesn't make sense. And we can fly up to 130 animals at a time to the facilities that will never put down a healthy animal. If you take anything away from this, if you are a pet owner, please spay and neuter. If you're not, please go by your local shelter and adopt an animal. If you can't adopt an animal, then foster one. If you can't foster one, then volunteer at the shelter and help them out. If you can't volunteer, then donate. Donate to your local shelter. Donate to Is My CoPilot. We're a nonprofit. We never charge the senders. We never charge the receivers for our long-distance transport services. You can visit our website, www.dogcopilot.org, and there you'll find a link where you can donate to our organization. All donations are tax-deductible. Thank you for your time.
Every animal that you save saves 2. The one that you save and the one that takes its place. Adopt, don't shop.
Again, for people listening, if you're listening to us on the YouTube, please like, subscribe, share this interview. It's about a man that's doing amazing work, with a group of volunteers. We're going to talk about this organization in just a moment. If you're listening to us on the other airwaves or on the podcasting sites, we thank you for that also. This is Dr. Peter Rork here on Fire Breathing Rob. He's been on before, and we're grateful to have him on again. Is My CoPilot is the organization, and it's also dogcopilot.org. Definitely check out this organization. It's amazing what they're doing. Doc, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you for having me, Rob. That's
all right.
It's a beautiful background. I imagine that's projected, but that's okay. You get to look at my library behind me.
Well, the library is probably better educationally for people to do than my background, but I guess you get the vitamin D if you're really in that kind of background. But regardless of that, let's kick this around. So the viewers that have not watched or listened to our first conversation, can you tell us a little bit about Is My CoPilot, how the organization got started in general?
Yeah, this is our 11th year. Is My CoPilot. We're a nonprofit based in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where I lived for 30 years practicing orthopedic surgery. Had been married before, got divorced, then got remarried, and my wife died tragically and suddenly after 2 months, and went into a tailspin and a really dark place. I had a mutual friend reach out to me and say that my late wife would want me to be happy and that I needed to just start moving on. So I reached out to a friend of mine who was an attorney who was experienced with beginning nonprofits, and I floated the idea I'd like to start a nonprofit for transporting dogs from high kill shelters to areas where they wouldn't be killed. And initially, this was on the model of an existing program called Pilots and Paws. So I was kind of copying them. The problem with Pilots and Paws is that, and I did a couple flights for them, is that they don't vet the senders and the receivers. So you could end up transporting animals that are going to be used for breeding purposes. Typically, it's one animal from one location to the next location, and you can spend a lot of resources transporting that one animal. Now, for that one animal, it's a game changer. It changes their world. But when you're spending $1,000 or $1,500 per animal per transport, you have to wonder about the viability of a program like that. And as a nonprofit, you really can't reach your hand out and ask for donations like that, because fiscally it just doesn't make any sense. So I was asked to transport animals from San Francisco to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, from the San Francisco SPCA. Marty Watts runs the program out there, just a terrific gal. So I went out, met her, and she said, I need to point you in a different direction. There's a gal, Sharon Lohman, who lives down in Merced, and she has a program called New Beginnings. And Sharon, I flew down and met Sharon, and this was on the 4th of September of 2012. And she walked me through the shelter, and the municipal shelter had a 94% euthanasia rate.
Wow.
Dogs nose in, dog nose out, it was only 6%. And she was desperate to get these dogs out of there. She had a private nonprofit that would kennel these dogs and drive them up to Portland, Seattle, Spokane, Missoula, Salt Lake City, Denver. I mean, anything to get them out. And of course, the receiving groups can cherry pick which animals that they want, and they would choose the animals that are most adoptable. But basically, they're going from kill to non-kill. So these trips can be 12, 14, 16 hours one way. And there's a sense of urgency for these drivers, because you don't stop every 3 hours and let the dogs out to pee. I mean, they get in the crate, you load the crate into the van, they stay in the crate until they get to their destination. And that's brutal. And it's brutal on the drivers, it's brutal on the animals. So I told Sharon, I looked at it, I said, I can knock those flights out in 4 or 5 hours. So I had a small aircraft at the time. And so I started flying for Sharon. And initially I was her best kept secret. I flew exclusively for her. And I was flying a Cessna Stationaire. It's a 206 H model, turbocharged, had extended range on that, so I could fly the long legs, and pulled all the seats out of the back, and I could put in 20 small crates in the back with dogs. If they were doubled up, if they were puppies, double that number. The greatest number I ever had in the 206 was a cat flight to Rifle, Colorado, and that was 86 cats. But these are a lot of kittens too. But heads count. And then after one really cramped flight, my daughter Taylor called, who's also our general counsel, asked me how the flight was, and I said, it really sucked. I was completely cramped. And we had discussed getting a larger aircraft at that time, and I knew what kind of aircraft would serve our needs, and it was a Cessna Caravan, and that's the 208B model. So I worked with a broker, found the aircraft, put it in the service, and the first flight I did, I went from carrying 20 animals to 250 animals on a flight. Now, meanwhile, the receiving partners now are getting a lot of dogs in, and they're reaching out to me independently of Sharon Lohman, because they're receiving animals from other locations as well, primarily the state of Texas, it's a real mess down there. And so they asked if I would start adding routes out of Texas up to the Pacific Northwest. I looked at it, it made sense. And really, it's not about me and not about what I was trying to do. It was all about saving as many dogs as possible. So we morphed from that pilots and paws model of one animal, one time, to the dog is my co-pilot model, where now we're flying typically hundreds of dogs per flight. And initially, when I looked at the numbers, I thought that if we kept the numbers in the back of the aircraft high, the cost per animal per transport would remain low, because financially, most of the money was still coming out of my own pocket at that time. And so I had to be, it's not an endless reservoir.
Right.
But then as we became fiscally more healthy, and that's basically through the work of Kara Pollard, is our executive director. And this woman is everything I'm not. She's kind, she's sweet, she has the ability to get people to want to help her. I mean, just the opposite of Peter Rork. But so in any event, we began to morph away from putting as many animals in the back of the aircraft as possible to the model where we would allow the senders and the receivers to determine what they wanted. And basically what they wanted were trying to transport the larger dogs out of Texas. And of course, with the larger dogs, you have a much larger crate. And we began to bulk out very early in the aircraft. And some flights carry as few as 40 or 45 animals. And you may say, wow, that's still a lot of animals. Well, not when we're comparing it to 200. But even so, we stepped away from that. And our numbers per transport started going down, but that was okay. We were serving the need of basically the sending group. Now, the sending groups are the groups that are trying to rub two nickels together and try to make it work. The receiving groups are the ones that can typically cherry pick the animals that they want, and so they get the best of the best. So these animals are healthy. They're completely adoptable. They don't have any behavioral problems. And the only thing that I would point out is that a lot of these animals are picked up as strays. So they tend to be voyagers. So you have to make sure you got a, fee collar on them, which is the GPS tracker or a fence yard or whatever. Mm-hmm. So we did that for a couple of years. I was doing all the flying myself, and honestly, it was I needed some help. So I brought on 3 guys who I sent through training, and they stepped up. And then as we started expanding, we saw that we couldn't fill the need with our one Cessna Caravan. Now, brand new, these aircraft are $3 million a copy, and I mean, who has that? So we bought ours used, and I started snooping around for a second Caravan and found one that really fit our needs. So we went out and purchased that aircraft. We raised the funds before we bought it, because initially when we bought the first Caravan and couldn't afford it, I went out and mortgaged my house and gave the money to the organization without any plan on how to get it back. I just knew it was the right thing. And I've always thought that if you do it smart, when you scale up, you can do it safely and it won't implode on itself. So the first couple steps that I did, I stepped without looking, kind of leap of faith. But what I've learned over the last couple of years is that with some good planning and with help of Kara Pollard, we've been able to raise the money for the second aircraft. And now we have 2 aircraft flying. One is based in the Jackson, Wyoming area. The other one is based in Dallas. And beginning last year, we started flying to the East Coast as well. So now we're on the national map. We fly to every single state, except the southeast part of the U.S. that has its own problems down there. And now we had 10 or 12 pilots, but then we started running into the problem of getting enough pilots' butts in the seats because they're all volunteers. They all have other jobs. And so that was difficult. So we went out and I offered a full-time job to one of our volunteer pilots who, fortunately for us, could take it. Now, granted, he's paid about 18 cents an hour, but even so, I mean, it's a labor of love. And that's Frank Maresca. He lives in Lewistown, Idaho. And he's a far better pilot than I am. Believe me, I flew with him. I thought, wow, I'm supposed to be the chief pilot, and I'm learning from this guy. But you learn from observing anyway. And having been in medicine for years, I mean that's the best teaching tool. So Frank now flies for us full time. We have 2 rescue flights. Kara used to do all the rescue flight coordination. Um, she was completely overwhelmed, and she's a much more valuable person in terms of administration and fundraising. So I hired a gal, Lynette Duford, who lives in Polson, Montana, because these jobs can be done remotely. And I had known Lynette for over a decade, because one of the very first rescue flights I did way back in the day with a 206 was to fly dogs into Lynette and into Montana. So we hired her as our second rescue flight coordinator. So now Kara organizes the flights for one aircraft. Lynette organizes the flights for the other aircraft. And you would think that just putting, pencil to paper and putting the destinations, and that's it. These gals actually are like our air traffic control. They're involved with every flight, at every step, at every moment, from the time that we load at 4:30 in the morning to when we get to our final destination, typically at 3 or 4 or 5 in the afternoon. So our flights are typically, when you look at the sending groups, if they put them in the van the way Sharon Lohman used to do back in 2012, if they drove them 300 miles in Texas, I mean, honestly, if you've ever been to Texas, 300 miles, you go for grocery shopping. I mean, it's nuts.
Right.
Those receiving shelters would be in the same situation. So we have to fly them 1,000 miles out of Texas to find a receiving group. So the Texas groups are now flying all over the country. We're sourcing about 90% of all of our animals out of Texas. The rest come out of California. And it's something that we're still scaling up. And now we're looking for a second full-time pilot. So we went from one underpaid executive director, Kara Pollard, and one volunteer pilot. We now have 3 going on 4 full-time employees and still 1 volunteer pilot, and a bevy of other pilots. But when you do the math, it would cost me $10,000 per volunteer pilot per year to keep them trained for insurance purposes. And if I consolidated that, suddenly I have a salary for a second pilot, and then there are many fewer moving parts for my rescue flight coordinators, begging and pleading the pilots to please volunteer to do this flight, because our flight schedule is quite full now. We are wheels up 6, sometimes 7 days a week with both aircraft. Now, for example, both aircraft are flying down to Texas tomorrow. One is going to Laredo, and the other one is going to Edinburgh. The one from Edinburgh is going to the East Coast. The one from Laredo is going up to Portland and Seattle. So, I mean, we're all over the place, and it's been a challenge. And I thought I'd made every mistake that you could possibly make, but I keep finding ways to make more. But it's not something that we can't dig ourselves out of. So in any event, right now we have a pretty good idea on how to do things, how to coordinate things, what the partners, the sending and receiving partners need. Basically, the sending partners need to get thousands of dogs out. The receiving partners can only accept so many. And that Go ahead.
Go ahead, Doc. Sorry.
I'm sorry?
Oh, no, go ahead. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
So that introduced another issue that we didn't recognize early on, is that when we're loading up in El Paso and we have stops in Portland and Seattle and Spokane and Missoula, how do we keep all those animals straight? Well, you load them in reverse order. We put a color-coded tag on the front of the crate so we can tell by looking at them. We have the health certificates that are required for transporting animals across state lines. And on that envelope, they have the number of crates that are getting off at each stop, not the number of animals, because sometimes the animals are doubled up, especially if they're smaller animals. And that creates more space in the aircraft. Because the last thing we want to do is to fly with an aircraft that's half full. And even worse than that is leaving some animals behind. So we're really very good at playing the Tetris game, at loading the aircraft. The animals that are getting off last are the ones in. So it's really a long day for them. But it's also a long day for our volunteer pilots and a long day for our rescue flight coordinators who are, we're constantly texting with each other all throughout the flight. And, you know, of course, on a commercial airlines, you're not allowed to use your cell phone. They say it interferes with the navigation.
Yeah.
Well, that's just not true. I mean, we're texting and calling all the time on the airplane. So, and it keeps the receiving groups up to speed if we're going to be 15 minutes early or 15 minutes late. Now, Kara has it. Kara and Lynette have it that, you know, if you can't be on time, be 30 minutes early. I mean, basically, that's how I was raised anyway.
Right.
So we rarely have a situation where we're sitting on the ramp with animals and the receiving partners aren't there. They only get one bite at the apple if they do that. I'll never fly for them again if stopping at McDonald's is more important than getting to the airport on time. Because
But have you had any issues, Doc, with anybody like, you know, being late for this or not really?
no, we have, and it's just you just wonder where, you know, what their motivation is. Now, for us, we have an endemic low-level sense of urgency to get the flights done.
Right.
The other thing is that we have to deal with weather. And now that we're flying from Edinburgh, Texas, I mean, look it up on the map to White Plains, New York. I mean, like that's an all-day sucker. I mean, it just so we'll go through 3 different weather systems, and the weather gods, I mean, they don't have to line up perfectly, but they have to line up well enough. Now, all of our pilots are trained to the level of airline transport pilots, and most of us, including myself, have an airplane transport pilot certificate. So we could fly for the airlines, the heavy metal, you know, put us in a simulator, give us 10 hours of instruction, and then off we go. So we're all qualified to do that. We're all qualified to fly in weather. But, you know, honestly, this is not a have to. This is a want to. And we want to get these flights done. We want to get them accomplished. And it doesn't really become a have to until we actually load the aircraft and launch. Now we have to get to our destination, because if we stop somewhere in between because of weather, and you call Kara and say, well, you know, I'm in Frankfort, Kentucky, on my way to New York. The weather's bad. What do I do with these 100 dogs in the back? I have to spend the night. I mean, that's a disaster. So, and we've had that happen once, and in retrospect, it probably could have been avoided. And that guy is no longer flying with us. He was an excellent pilot. It wasn't a good fit. That's all I'll say. Yeah. So we have to make sure we can get to our destination. So Frank is doing a lot of the orientation flying. I'm still doing a lot of the orientation flying for the new pilots. We are now heavy into our flying season. We're about 6 or 7 weeks into it. We've flown almost 1,000 animals in the month of April, and a couple of weeks ago, I flew number 26,000 to its destination, and it was kind of a cross-eyed pit bull named Sheriff, and it came out of El Paso, Texas, and ended up in the Dalles, Oregon, of all places. So, and actually ended up in the Dalles because I couldn't get into Portland because the weather was bad. So we have alternate airports that will serve our needs. And honestly, if the receiving groups can't drive an hour and a half to go pick up a dog, I mean, I have to balance that against me flying 10 hours to get there. I'm going, well, is that really fair? I mean, let's put it in perspective. So that's where we are with Dog Is My CoPilot. We're currently kind of sniffing around for a third aircraft, it might be the life of me. Like, but it's I think it's a necessary step. I mentioned earlier that the southeast part of the U.S. And Rob, you're down in Florida, and Florida is not nearly as bad as Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. I mean, it's really terrible down there for the
Yeah, I
dogs.
want to ask you that because I know you brought up Texas, and I do have a lot of questions. But since we're speaking about this, let's just run the gamut here on these questions. So why is Texas, I see these commercials and it makes me sick to my stomach as a person that does love dogs and has two dogs. When I see these dogs and they're mostly down south, whether it's Texas or these other southeastern states, as you stated, Doc, that they're locked up outside on chains, and it's really kind of disgusting. You know, is it a culture thing where they just kind of let the dogs run rampant, or they leave the dogs chained up outside and these dogs
Yeah,
almost dying out there? Go ahead, Doc.
or not chained. They just
Right.
the dogs aren't, and cats, because we fly cats as
Yeah.
well. They're not spayed or neutered. The weather's tolerable year round. It doesn't get, cold like it does in Wyoming, like 40 below.
Right.
And so they're running around like crazy. They come back to be fed and watered, and then off they go again. They're not treated, typically they're treated like family members and pets. Most people are really good. The ones that are bad, the bad pet, owners,
Yeah.
they make up for all the good stuff that the rest of us are doing. And it's educational. I mean, a lot of the people, maybe they can't afford to get their animals spayed or neutered. There are a lot of free and spay and neuter clinics floating around, and you can go to your vet and get a little coupon for that. But it's just not that important to them. Now, for me, I've got my two dogs. I was down from four the last time we spoke. I lost two last year. It's they're important to me. They're family members. I mean,
Right. It's hard. I lost the dog in 21, 13 years old. She was my life. I had some tough times. Yeah. I had some really tough days, and she was kind of my life. I don't know if saving my life would be the correct word. It's not like I was going to do anything insane, but I had some tough days and she was there. And when she died, actually, I was with my family at the time, and they knew the dog, and her name was Shawnee. And when that was the first dog that I had that, had to end its life. And we tried, and they said she had cancer. They could have operated, but I'm 13 years old. They said, we don't know if she's even going to come out of it if we do the operation and get it successful. And if they do have her come out of the anesthesia, and she becomes healthy for a while, they said the cancer is going to end up coming back, and you're going to end up either doing the same thing or have to put her down. I wouldn't want a person to go through all that trauma if that's the case. Rather, have somebody that's a family member, like you said. And it's still hot. I still think about her constantly. This is 21 when this happened, and it's hard. It's a very grieving.
you never get over it. It's
Right.
it's in the back of your head there. It's and sometimes it floats forward, and you just get very sad.
Doc, I can't, and I want to get into this with you. I can't comprehend how people. I know these people. I've had dogs sleep in my bed. I kiss my dogs. I don't give a damn what people say, think, or, that's their problem. But, my thing is, and maybe you can kind of get to this because you met a lot of people. You've talked to a lot of these people in the shelters and how they, how these dogs get there. Is it a lot of these people that they don't understand how a dog is family, how a dog, you could yell at the dog. You could basically treat the dog like crap. We don't push that on this program. I'm a dog person, but that dog will be by your side in 10 seconds after you do that. That dog is loyal, more loyal than people in your family, than your friends. And I see some people, most people see that, but a lot of people don't. Why do you feel like that is?
Well, dogs threw their lot in with humans about 10,000 years ago. You know, they used to just follow the tribes, and then they became part of the tribe. There are people who accept that and people who do not accept that.
Right.
And it's really, it's a generational thing. I was raised with dogs. My children are raised with dogs. Their children's children. My God, that would make me a grandfather. I have one now, so anyway, we'll be raised with dogs.
Yeah.
Most of the animals that end up in the shelter are usually picked up as strays. There are some owner surrenders, where somebody gets a puppy and they didn't realize there was going to be 70 pounds of tail and tongue and sometimes drool. So it's, but you know, I agree. I love my dogs better than most people I know. I mean, it's just...
Well, I feel like, Doc, the dogs save, you know, like I said, I think that dog saved me. I think dogs save people more so than they even understand it or even comprehend it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. It's like the old joke about, you know, if your dog is barking at the back door and your wife is yelling at the front door, who do you let in? And the answer is let the dog in because he'll stop barking when he gets in the house.
That's true. That's true. But
So,
I just wanted to express that for people listening, because if you don't have a dog, you should look into that. I do want to get back into Dog Is My CoPilot. Again, for people listening, Dr. Peter Rork here on Fire Breathing Rob. Dog Is My CoPilot is the organization, dogcopilot.org. Definitely check out the website if you can donate, if you can volunteer. We'll talk about a little bit more about the volunteering at the end. But I do want to express that people should donate if they can. You know, it's a tough economic time for a lot of people right now, but if you got a couple of bucks, anything would help. Peter's talked throughout the interview about how expensive it is, not only for him, but for everybody else involved. Is there a month of the year that there's more of these trips that are really going up? There's more homeless dogs or stray dogs, I guess, if we want to say the correct terminology, being sent to the shelters that you're seeing? Has been doing this for over 12 years.
yeah, you know, definitely the summer months are the months that are the craziest for them.
And this is mostly, for the most part, you're seeing that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, most of the traffic is in Texas, where a lot of these dogs are being picked up.
Well, the traffic is everywhere, but right now we're addressing the needs. We didn't pick Texas, and Texas didn't pick us. It was the receiving partners that picked us. So we asked the receiving partners, where are the animals coming from? Now, if a group in Edinburgh wants to send a group of some dogs to White Plains, New York, and put them in a van, MapQuest that. That's a 34-hour drive. You can't do that. And so these dogs don't have an avenue for escape. That's where we do it. It's an all-day flight for us. I mean, it's 10 hours in the airplane, but it beats 34. And basically, the rule of thumb.
How fast are these planes going?
Let me tell you about the Caravan. It's big, but at least it's slow. We don't have an airspeed indicator. We have a calendar. I mean, that's how slow it is. I mean, we're flying along and birds will actually perch on the wing struts.
Really?
No,
wow.
I'm kidding. That's how.
All right. Hey, you never know.
We go about 155 knots, which is about 180 miles an hour.
Because I know the regular airplanes go about 500, something like that.
Yeah, 500 or 560 or whatever.
That's why I was trying to comprehend why you're saying that this is taking 10 hours. I'm like, I've been on flights. It's usually 3, 4, 5 hours, depending on obviously where you go. And then you say, okay, so now we have kind of a grasp of why it's.
Yeah, I mean, it takes us about a third of the amount of time it would for them to drive. And so, and we only like to fly with one fuel stop. If we have to take, and we can get to
so you are stopping then still then.
Oh yeah. We can't make it nonstop. And there isn't any place in the country that we can't get to with only one fuel stop. So that's the beauty
Are
of it.
there places though, Doc, where you don't have to stop? Like it's close enough where there's no stop, like a 2 or 3
Oh
hour
yeah,
flight.
yeah. So let me give you an example of a trip I flew 10 days ago.
Okay.
I deadheaded down to Hobbs, New Mexico. Now, Hobbs, New Mexico is right on the border of Texas, and most of the dogs are coming out of Denver City, Texas. Gina Beard runs a program down there, just an absolute sweetheart, a heart of gold. And honestly, she's the one who taught me that if you go into animal rescue, you'll hate everybody by 9 a.m. because I mean it's just so terrible what they have to deal with. So there's no place for us to get Jet A or stay in Denver City. So we stay in Hobbs. They drive them over, load up the airplane. I fly from Hobbs up to Denver, drop off dogs, up to Fort Collins, drop off dogs, fly to Grand Junction, Colorado, drop off dogs, fly to Salt Lake City, drop off dogs, and then fly down to Salt Lake City. Those are all done without having a fuel stop in between, although I'll take on fuel with those stops. And then out of El Paso, basically they're now sending their animals. I can't take them back up to Salt Lake because they got their fill yesterday when I flew through. The other thing is that we don't fly empty, because as I fly through these places, and we do these trips over and over and over again, and our calendar, our flight schedule is basically on a every 2 or 3 week repeating schedule. So it's not as if we're trying to think of something new. We have our schedule set through November right now. And that makes it easy for the pilots who can look at that and they can say, well, I'll take this trip, I'll take that trip. It's more difficult for the guys and gals who fly for airlines, for example, where they don't get their schedule for the next month until 2 weeks before the next month. And I've always told them, look, if you can pick out a time and there's a pilot already assigned, we'll reassign that pilot, especially if it's me, because I've done enough flying in my lifetime now. I have 10,000 hours in a cockpit. If you think about that, how many months is that? I mean, or maybe years, I don't know. I've had enough. I mean, the thrill is gone. So that's what we do with our scheduling thing. I forgot what
No, you were saying summer is the month where there's
summer.
Yeah.
And it's also that's why when we
why do you feel like that is that because it's just warmer outside and they're picking up more stray dogs?
Right. Yeah, that's exactly
okay.
Right. And now that creates a bit of a hassle for us because we're leaving at 4:30 in the morning or 5 a.m.
Right.
because otherwise it's 100 degrees outside. And our aircraft, once you shut down, they don't have air conditioning. And honestly, it's an aluminum box.
It's getting hot.
Filled with dogs. 30 minutes max is what I allow the pilots to take on fuel, offload the animals. And the groups that we've worked with over and over again are completely dialed in on what's necessary to keep these dogs safe, that we can get back up to 13 or 14,000 feet where it's 20 degrees outside. So it's it's nice and cool. So that's where we are. It's an interesting lifestyle. It's almost a thankless job, except for people like you and people who follow your program and are very generous donors to Dog Is My CoPilot. If you've ever seen a photo of our aircraft, it's like a flying billboard, and we have some of our larger corporate partners, sponsors that are kind of plastered on the side of the aircraft, and it's kind of a fun design. It's a head turner when we pull into airports, but not so much anymore since we go to the same places over and over again.
I want to get into these questions because, I remember when you were on the CBS News Sunday morning back a year or two ago. With that said, you spoke about that was during obviously kind of the heat of COVID. There was tons of people adopting dogs. Now, my question to you is, since you've been in the business, you're talking to all these pilots, you're still flying, of course. Is there still that want for dogs in these places where you're dropping off like there was in COVID? Has it cooled down? Are you worried about this now because it was very hot and now it could be cooling down? I'm not sure. You would know better than me.
Um, that's an excellent point and an excellent question. Yes, it has cooled down. As a matter of fact, we canceled a trip for this weekend because the receiving groups are full. So our sending group, which still has the same problem, can't offload the dogs. And they'll say, well, what do we do with the dogs? And our response is, where do you want us to fly them? It's not as if it's a load them and forget it. We have to have a destination. They've already had their destination that they've worked with. So yes, that's cooled off a bit. There have been some instances, but not like the media likes to portray, where some of the dogs that were adopted during COVID have been returned. Those numbers are actually very small. Measurable.
Okay, good. Because I was worried about that, because I've heard that in the media, as you stated, that they're saying all these people, because they're going back to work, they're not working from home, they're all bringing back their dogs. And I'm like, cheapest crow, this is insane. This is terrible. So you're saying that that's not really that correct?
No, it's
Okay.
not. We haven't seen that. So at least the numbers that I've seen haven't supported that.
Right.
So that's where we are. We're busier during the summer. Flying weather's typically better during the summer too. Thunderstorms throughout Texas, that makes it a bit of a challenge. And it's not thunderstorms that, well, you live in Florida. I mean, it's not thunderstorms that come up in the afternoon. They're like all day long. I mean, it's just, you wake up to a thunderstorm, and I wake up, I look at the weather radar, and I'm going, oh shit. Okay, all right, we'll get it done. We'll have a very serpentine route. We'll do this, do that, just wind our way around them, and because you can't fly through them because
Right.
they'll pull the wings off an airplane.
Right. Not even just that, you're an aluminum plane. That wouldn't be probably good either. I want to ask you with this last question. I know you, and then I want you to go through as far as just going through where people can find you, help out, and all that stuff again. My thing is, Doc, is the question. I know you said you're looking slowly but surely, maybe getting that third plane. With that said, moving into more of the Southeast, we're talking about Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia, obviously Florida. With I know you said it's not as bad in Florida as in those other states. If you do get that third plane, that is the agenda: is to move into the Southeast in those states and try to cool down the problem there. And where are the problems in the Southeast? Is it those states I kind of said, Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia, those states, or is it in Florida?
That's exactly right. And we plan on basing this aircraft somewhere in the Atlanta area where we can get good servicing. And it's all about the ongoing maintenance of the aircraft. It has to be close to that. The last thing we want to do is, it costs us, between about $500 per hour to operate the machinery. And we don't want to have to fly the aircraft 2 hours to get an oil change. Because that just doesn't make sense. So we'll base
But is the hub at like the big airports? I'm sorry to interrupt you, or the smaller airports when you're flying into these states? Go ahead.
Smaller airports. Okay. So probably our next place would be Peachtree, DeKalb, outside of Atlanta. And they're friendly to an aircraft like us. They have enough maintenance programs and FBOs, fixed base operators, which is basically the gas station at the airport. So that's where we are. We've got a little coin in the bank right now. We want to get through this season to see if our donations keep up with the expense of running 2 aircraft.
Are you worried about the economy with this going on? We're looking at a recession. People that don't believe in that, they're probably in different planets than we are. Besides that point, we talked about COVID. We're also looking at that recession issue. Are you worried about that with the donations, regular people, corporations laying off people and trying to cut their costs too?
Well, it's interesting. Short answer is yes. The longer answer is recently we've had a couple of our squadron members say, can't do it anymore. Money's too big. And that to me is the canary in the coal mine. Yeah. And so these are modest amounts of money. And yet, when you look at the big picture, I understand it. I get it. And every time someone withdraws from that, I'll thank them for everything they did up to that point, and we appreciate it. We couldn't have gotten where we were without their help. And so, by the way, everybody who donates $100 or more, you'll get a handwritten note from me. I'll write a personalized thank you note to you. And so I don't write as many as I'd like to, but it's that offer is out there.
Let's end with this. Again, for people listening, dogcopilot.org. Definitely check out the website. I know Doc has told you a lot about the organization throughout this interview, but I do hope you check out the website, see it for yourself. You can see that it's a very legit, good organization, helping a lot of dogs throughout 12 years of, and hopefully many more to come. With that said, just tell the people, besides the website, dogcopilot.org, Doc, how they can help you. You know, if they want to volunteer, what states should they be in to help out? Find you on social media, all that jazz.
Well, I don't do social media, but Kara Pollard does. If you want to reach out to her, it's Kara at Dog CoPilot, no hyphen in CoPilot, dogcopilot.org, meaning we're a nonprofit. If you want to help out with your local shelter, as I said, charity begins at home. That's the place that you can start. And if they are overwhelmed and their kennels are full, reach out to us and we'll see if we can't do a flight for you. We tried initially to do the vertical integration where we find the senders, do the flight, find the receivers. It made me crazy because there's so many moving parts and so many. So we got away from that, but we're kind of morphing back into that again, where people will reach out and say, we have a problem, can you fly? And our question is, where? And then they say a general direction, and we'll give them the names, but then they have to do the footwork. They have to call the shelters. They have to, but if everything aligns, all the stars align, and you can get that flight, we'll do it for you. We have a very busy schedule, but we typically carve out 2 or 3 days a month that we can push flights forward or back because of weather issues or mechanical issues. And if we had neither, then we have a spot where we can stick in an oh, by the way flight. So anyway, dogcopilot.org, hit the donate button, send us, $5, $10, become a squadron member. That would be great. We're doing good things. We're not sitting on the sidelines, and you can just think of the bright side. You can get frequent flyer miles if you use your credit card. All right. So that would be helpful for your next trip going down to Miami.
And also, if you want to help out too, you can donate, like Doc said, but also go in the online store, wear it around. People say, hey, you're wearing a Dog Is My CoPilot sweatshirt, t-shirt, whatever it may be. And then, drum up that conversation about the organization. Say, hey, I donated, or I bought this, and this is what they're doing. Maybe one word will pass to another person, to another person, to another person.
Kara's going to kill me because I completely forgot to mention our DIMC store, and it's a group that we work with that is they are just crackerjack, and we used to peddle our little license plate frames and hats and stuff, but we have enough going on it. And through this group, they're able to take care of all that. You get mugs, t-shirts, hoodies, hats, license plate frames, backpacks. I mean, you can get whatever you want. And our logo is unique, and it'll draw. And actually, let me give you a quick backstory on the logo. It's a picture of a red aircraft with a black lab. His tongue's hanging out. He's wearing goggles and a little paw on the tail. And that black lab, the model for that black lab was my first rescue black lab, Doyle. So he lives forever on in my heart, and I get to think of him every time I look at our logo, which is every single day.
Well, Dr. Peter Rork, thanks so much for your time. Again, for people listening, one more time, we'll shout it out at you. dogcopilot.org. Dr. Peter Rork here on Fire Breathing Rob. Doc, this will not be the last time. We'll keep in contact. I always like to, whether it's every 6 months or every year at least, advertise these great organizations that are doing amazing work in our community and around the country and even around the world. And you have been doing it, and I'm grateful to have you on for the second time, and there will definitely be a third time. Again, Dr.
I like
Rork.
that.
Say
All
again,
right.
Doctor.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Rork. Again, it's dogcopilot.org. Thanks so much for your time today.
All right. Thank you. You have a great day.